Welcome, students. Today's topic is lists and for loops. Oh my goodness, that's a lot to cover in one slideshow. Hang on, it's going to be fun. Okay, let's start with lists. Lists are Python data structures that contain ordered changeable elements. These are often known as arrays in other languages. So let's look at some list examples. You could have a list of prime numbers, define primes with the elements 2, 3, 5, 7, and 11. You could also have a list of colors with the strings red, blue, and yellow. And you could have a list of mixed elements called Bosh with the characters C and A, which are strings, followed by the number 7. So Python does allow mixed types into lists. And you could have the empty list, which you will use more often than you think, with nothing in it. Okay, now let's look at list methods. Recall that a method it's basically what you can do with a list. So you can append elements to a list. The reason why it's a method is because of the dot notation. So because colors is defined as a list, dot then allows you to access all the different methods, all the things that you can do to the list. And one of them is dot append. And here we want to append the color green, which is a string, to the list of colors. And so if now we check the list colors, you can see that it has green added to the end of it. So append is basically the method that you want to use to add elements to the end of a list. Perhaps the most useful method that there is for lists. Okay, reverse is another list method. So you can try colors.reverse. And then if you look at colors, it reverses the order. More list methods. You can sort them. It's a little interesting. How will it sort the list? You can check it. And can you see how it sorts it? Not by wavelength, by alphabetical order. Useful method there. And then you can also use the .remove method to remove members from a list, as verified here. Why would someone want to remove blue? I do not know. Okay, now let's look at list indices. So primes 0, okay? What does that do? Well, like with strings, it's going to take the 0th element of the list. A string of index 0 will take the 0th character, or the first one. In this case, it is 2. Primes 2 will take which prime? Well, it depends on how you say it. It's like is it the second? Well, sure, it's this, or is it the third, right? Because you've got the 0th, first, and second, which in effect gives you the third prime, which is 5. And then primes 0 to 3 will give the first 3 prime numbers, which are 2, 3, and 5. And please do note that this does exclude the third index, which would be 7. Those are the 0th, first, and second indices. And for this is shorthand notation for what's above it. We will be using this later in data analytics, and do note that, so by default, if you don't put anything in I guess before the colon, it assumes 0 there. And you can see it does give the same result. Okay, more lists. Can't get enough lists, right? Okay, so the global function length works with lists. We can see, well, how many primes do we have in our list? And length returns 5. So there are 5 elements in that list. Now, the question here would be, what's the last element of the list? Can you use prime index 5? Error! You can't do it, right? Why? Because 0th, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th are the included elements, not the 5th index. So here's one way you can do it. You could find, hey, I know that the length of the primes is 5, and I can do -1, and that will actually give you the last member of the list, which in this case is 11. Another more elegant strategy, I would say, is to use negative indices. So primes -1 will give you the last element of the list, which in this case is 11. Now, what about finding the index of a list? How would you do that? Well, you can use the dot index method. So colors.index blue. And so I think this is assuming our original list of colors and blue was in it. And it's going to return the index for blue, which is 2. Okay, so it's not the 0th or the 1st, but the 2nd index, or the 3rd member of the list. Similarly, you could find primes.index 3, and you could ask yourself now, what should that give back? Okay, it's the 2nd prime, so what number do you expect it to return? And you get 1, because it is an index of 1. 2nd member is the 1st index of 1. You have to relearn how to count here with computer science. Okay, now let's look at a for loop. The reason why for loops are included here is because they're actually used widely with lists, as we will see. So for loops iterate over a sequence of elements. And again, that sequence could be a list. So for loops are great for repeating code, like printing the first 100 numbers. For loops are ideal for performing operations on all members of a list. Later, you'll see another kind of a loop called a while loop. But let's look at for loops, and let's look at the first example. So for color in colors, what's going on here? Well, the Python keyword for starts a loop, okay? Then you get to the variable that will be iterated. So you get to pick this name. It's actually arbitrary. I could write C, I could write whatever I want here. Okay, you'll see how it works in just a moment. And then in is another keyword. So this is the Python keyword in, preparing looping through the sequence. So it's for some variable in the sequence to iterate through. In this case, it's a list. So in this case, the request is print color.upper. So what's going on here? Note that the word color, without the S, is in both lines. So what happens is the for loop goes through each element, and what it's going to do here for each element defined as the variable color, it is going to print out the uppercase version. So dot upper is a method on a string. The elements of colors are in fact strings. And again, as we rotate through, we call them all color, okay? And so what this line of code does, it will display each element in the list colors as an uppercase. So if I'd written for C in colors, it would be print C.upper, okay? 4 spaces are required. Just press return, get it automatically. And then, as mentioned, those are the instructions. And you can see it looks really nice here. And you do get 1 in each line because print actually resets each line there. So blue, green, red, and yellow. Let's look at another example here. We're going to make a list of the square primes from the list of primes. Well, to start with, we don't have any of them, so we're going to start with an empty list. Okay? And we're going to use the list of primes to populate this list. So we're going to go through the list of primes. In this case, I've used I for iterator, which is actually standard for I in primes. The previous example, I used color because it was more indicative of what it actually was. And in this case, I could have also written for prime in primes to make it more indicative, but I is actually standard for iterator. So what are we going to do with each prime number? Well, we basically want to square it and then add it to the list square primes, which we can use with the dot append method. So square primes dot append, and that is the square operator. I asterisk asterisk square. And then if we call the list square primes, you can see that we end up with the first 5 primes, in this case, squared. Okay. Now let's look at range. Range is really useful with for loops. For I in range 5. What is this doing? Well, it just goes through the first 5 numbers starting with 0. Okay? And so if we want to print out the first 5 numbers, that's how you do it. Now, I show the first 5 because they would fit on the slide, but basically this is how you print out, say, the first 100 numbers. It's using a for loop. Before I in range 100, print I. So the range is used anytime you want to loop through a bunch of numbers in sequence and do something to them. Happy coding!